In warfare, there's never a lack of crazy schemes. World War II was no different, and during those 6 years of fighting, hundreds of ideas were tested out. Between successes like the Dambusters raid and the failures like the Bob Simple tank, there's a grey area. In this video, we shine a light on that middle ground, the most annoying things the world did to Germany and Japan during the Second World War. There are few things more annoying than an itch you just can't scratch. The professional pranksters at the British Special Operations Executive, or SOE, knew this well and decided to weaponize it against Germany. They made itching powder from ground up glass wool. This was a devious compound, as once it was implanted into fabrics, it was virtually impossible to remove. Skin exposed to the powder itched immediately, and once you scratched it, the itch turned into an unbearable burning sensation. The powder was sent out in secret supply drops to resistance groups fighting the Germans. On the Axis-held island of Crete, for example, Greek resistance fighters spread the powder on the beds of Germans billeted in their houses. Village washerwomen were in on it too, spreading it on shirts they cleaned for their occupiers. German officers assumed their soldiers had been infected with mites or lice and, presumably itching like crazy in their freshly laundered shirts, ordered all billets deloused. German medical staff were overworked and crucial supplies had to be diverted from the front lines to deal with the itching infection. Probably laughing to themselves, the pranksters of SOE designated the operation a great success. What's the best way to undermine enemy morale at home? If you said send them an angry postcard, you'd be 100% correct. This is exactly what Betty McDonald did to the Japanese in 1944. McDonald was an officer working for the United States Office of Strategic Services, which was essentially an American version of British SOE. Working out of India, McDonald's division was responsible for conducting intelligence operations designed to undermine the Japanese army. In spring 1944, Allied units captured a mailbag from the retreating Japanese 18th Division. It was passed on to McDonald at OSS, who was immediately struck with a great idea. Destined for families back home, the hastily scrawled notes had no information of tactical value, but they had passed Japanese censors. Written on easily made, locally available paper, the notes were called postcards by OSS. After copying the censor markings, McDonald slipped reproduction postcards describing terrible conditions into the bag. The mailbag was then conveniently dropped where the 18th Division would find it. The propaganda campaign was designated Project Blackmail, and around 400 fake postcards were sent to Japan. They contained messages like, "Oberson, where are the supplies? We are starving in the jungle, how can we fight without bullets?" The postcards did far more damage than anyone at OSS dared to hope. Soon after they reached Japan, the government was forced to answer uncomfortable questions about the supply situation for the 18th Division fighting in Burma. The resulting scandal forced several ministers to resign. Almost universally, soldiers like a few things above all else. One of those things is smut. Surprising to some, many nations were printing smutty leaflets along with propaganda during the Second World War. Once airdropped on an enemy position, the idea was that the soldiers would keep the leaflets for usage later on, and in the meantime, the propaganda would undermine their morale. On the Allied side, these leaflets were produced by Britain, the US, New Zealand, and Australia. Each country focused on different themes. The British emphasized the numbers of Eastern European and Italian foreign workers pouring into Germany to support the war effort. In reality, these workers often lived in harsh conditions and were treated poorly, but in British leaflets, foreign workers enjoyed themselves, as well as enjoying the soldiers' wives and girlfriends. British leaflets also highlighted the Wehrmacht's increasing losses. A two-pronged attack, these leaflets were designed to highlight the futility of fighting and make the soldier worry about his wife or girlfriend being unfaithful. The Americans went for a more offensive strategy. Their leaflets showed Nazi officials using their power to force themselves on women. One tagline read, "For us at the front, there is only fear and death. For the important officials at home, our women. For men like Josef Goebbels, this was probably not far from the truth. Over 70,000 leaflets were dropped on the enemy by US forces alone. Some areas of the front lines were carpeted with leaflets, and a great many of these found their way into soldiers' hands. It's unlikely that they were successful, however. More often than not, soldiers ignored the propaganda and focused on the leaflets' images alone. In 1943, the US was facing a problem: how to supply the guerrillas fighting the Japanese in the Philippines. The Filipino fighters needed weapons and money to equip themselves and remain a thorn in their enemy's side. The big brains of the OSS came up with an idea that would both hurt the Japanese and support the Filipinos: dump loads of money into the Filipino economy. When the Japanese occupied the Philippines in May 1942, they replaced the standard Filipino peso with a currency of their own, known by the locals as Mickey Mouse money. The authorities had very limited facilities to manufacture the invasion money, and consequently, its value was high. The rationale of the OSS was simple. Millions of low-denomination notes would be funneled to guerrillas with orders to spend as much as they could, especially on supplies the Japanese depended on. While equipping the fighters with what they needed, such a large influx of cash would also cause inflation and damage the occupation economy. This all changed in 1943 when General Douglas MacArthur greenlit the operation. Production of the counterfeit money began in the US and in Australia, where 5 million 10 peso notes, 3 million 5 peso notes, 1.5 million 1 peso notes, and 500,000 50 centavo notes were produced. The effect of this libertarian nightmare on Japanese morale was severe. As their situation in the Philippines worsened, the Allies dropped millions of banknotes from the sky. It was literally raining money, and the Japanese occupation economy was ruined. While remaining officially neutral for the duration of the Second World War, Sweden was a hotbed of anti-Nazi sentiment. The successful German invasions of Denmark and Norway cut Sweden off from its traditional allies and forced the government into working with its occupiers. After seeing what happened to Norway and Denmark, many Swedes were concerned that Germany would erode their sovereignty too. Two patriots, Ewan Butler and Janet Goh, decided to show the Germans how they felt, with a prank. In May 1944, they learned of an exclusive gala event celebrating the arrival of famous German comedian Georg Alexander. Entrance to the gala required an invitation that could only be acquired from the German consulate, and it was open only to Germans. Butler and Goh had contacts in the SOE, and through them, they obtained a list of 1,500 Swedish Nazis and sympathizers. They printed 3,000 counterfeit tickets to the gala and sent 2 to each person on their list. To complete the prank, a letter was included that demanded the invitee don their best clothes to impress their German dignitaries. After the war, Butler remembered the German colony had turned out in full force to applaud the talented visitors from Berlin. They found themselves forced to fight through a dense crowd of infuriated Swedes, many of the men in top hats, their wives in sumptuous fur coats. It took a long time to sort out the muddle. The evening was a total embarrassment for the Swedish Nazis and the Germans. Not to be outdone by the Swedes, the Norwegian resistance played its own pranks on its German invaders. Their most successful was in the winter of 1940. When it started out, the Norwegian resistance was full of part-timers. Men who wanted the Germans out, but had jobs they couldn't leave behind, lest their families starve. They worked in the sardine industry, and sardine canning provided the men with payment as well as food for their families. When the Germans requisitioned the entire sardine catch, the fishermen were outraged. This affront was bad enough to turn many in Norway against the Germans, and it wasn't long before the resistance knew why the invaders wanted so much fish. The Battle of the Atlantic was in full swing, and U-boat crews needed cheap, non-perishable, easily stored food for their long voyages. Tin sardines from Norway were the perfect choice, but unknown to the Kriegsmarine, their tins had a little something extra thrown in. The Norwegian resistance had made contact with SOE, and together they had formulated a dastardly plan. Britain sent the Norwegians barrels upon barrels of croton oil. This was mixed with sardines in canning factories in place of vegetable oil, which was used as a preservative. Doesn't seem bad, right? Well, croton oil is an extremely powerful laxative with a fishy taste. The taste was undetectable when mixed with sardines, however, and U-boat crews were none the wiser. I can only imagine what it would have been like for every single sailor to get diarrhea the exact same moment while in the confines of a submerged U-boat. So those were 6 of the most annoying things the Allies did to the Germans and Japanese to slow them down. But what do you think? Which do you think is the worst? Why do you think the British had so much laxative oil on hand? Do you think you could have gotten away with some of these pranks? Let us know all this and more in the comment section below. And just before you go scrolling those suggested videos, guys, make sure you check out our new channel called The Braved, where if you're interested in content here, I'm pretty sure you'll be interested in content there, where we go through all different eras to find the most badass individuals throughout all of them. And we present it in an extremely high quality manner that, once again, I think you will all enjoy. And if you want to help us out and get access to a behind the scenes Discord and some exclusive videos, consider donating to the Patreon. And if you just want to join our wider community, check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Discord. All those links and more are in the description below. Anyways, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.